When my son told me that the inheritance was only for his generation, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even argue. I just sat there in my living room, the same living room where I had rocked him to sleep as a baby, and I felt something inside me go quiet. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you realize that the person standing in front of you isn't the person you thought you knew. My son, my only child, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had just told me that the house his father and I had built with our own hands, the savings we had carefully tucked away through decades of hard work, none of it was meant for me anymore. It was for him. For his generation. Those were his exact words. And in that moment, I understood that I had become invisible in my own story. My name is Margaret, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had done everything right. I raised my son with love. I supported his dreams. I welcomed his wife into our family with open arms. I babysat my grandchildren every weekend. I cooked Sunday dinners that filled the house with laughter and warmth. I was the kind of mother who never asked for anything in return because I believed that love was its own reward. But somewhere along the way I stopped being a person to my son. I became a resource. A convenience. An obligation. And when I was no longer useful, I became a problem that needed to be solved. This is the story of how I lost my son and found myself. It's the story of how I learned that sometimes the people you love the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. And it's the story of how I made a decision that shocked everyone, a decision that seemed crazy and reckless and maybe even cruel. But it was also the decision that saved my life. Because when my son told me that the inheritance was only for his generation, I did something that no one expected. I legally adopted a stranger. And that choice changed everything. I need to take you back to the beginning, back to when things were still good, or at least when I believed they were. My husband Robert and I got married when we were both 23 years old. We were young and broke and so full of hope it almost hurt. Robert worked construction and I worked as a secretary at a small accounting firm. We lived in a tiny apartment that smelled like mildew and had a heater that only worked half the time. But we were happy. We were building something together. When I got pregnant with David, our son, we were terrified and thrilled in equal measure. We didn't have much, but we promised each other that our child would have more than we did. That he would have opportunities. That he would have a future. David was born on a cold November morning, and from the moment I held him, I knew that my life had changed forever. He was beautiful in that way that all mothers think their babies are beautiful, but he really was special. He had Robert's blue eyes and my stubborn chin. He was a quiet baby, thoughtful even as an infant. As he grew, he became the center of our universe. Every decision we made was about him. Should we move to a better school district? It's for David. Should we skip vacations so we could save for his college fund? It's for David. Should I work extra hours so he could take piano lessons? It's for David. We never resented it. We never even questioned it. That's what parents do. You give everything you have because you love them. Robert and I worked like dogs for 30 years. We saved every penny we could. We bought a small house when David was 5, a modest 3-bedroom place with a backyard and a front porch. It wasn't fancy, but it was ours. Robert spent his weekends fixing it up, building shelves and painting walls and planting trees that would grow tall long after we were gone. I sewed curtains and tended a vegetable garden and made that house into a home. We paid off the mortgage when David was in high school. I remember the day we made that final payment. Robert and I sat at the kitchen table and just looked at each other, and we didn't need to say anything. We had done it. We had built something real. Something that would last. David was a good student. He worked hard just like we taught him. He got into a decent state university and we paid for every bit of it. Tuition, books, rent, food, everything. We didn't want him to graduate with debt like so many of his friends. We wanted him to start his adult life free and clear. It took most of our savings, but we didn't care. This was what we had been working for all along. When he graduated with a degree in business, we were so proud we could barely stand it. Robert cried at the ceremony, which he tried to hide, but I saw. I always saw. David got a good job at a marketing firm in the city. He was doing well, making more money in his first year than Robert and I had made together in our best year. He met a woman named Claire at work. She was smart and pretty and ambitious. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. The wedding was expensive, more than Robert and I would have ever spent on ourselves, but we helped pay for it because that's what you do. Claire's parents paid for some of it too, but David wanted everything to be perfect and we wanted him to be happy. So we smiled and wrote checks and told ourselves it was worth it. At first, everything seemed fine. David and Claire moved into a nice apartment downtown. They both had demanding careers. They were busy but they made time for us. We'd have dinner once a month, sometimes more. Claire was polite and pleasant. She thanked us for raising such a wonderful man. She called me Mom, which made my heart swell. I thought we were going to be a close family, the kind of family where everyone looks out for each other. Then Robert got sick. It happened fast, the way these things sometimes do. He started feeling tired all the time. He'd come home from work and fall asleep in his chair before dinner. I thought it was just age catching up with him. We were in our early 60s by then. But when he started losing weight and coughing up blood, I made him go to the doctor. Lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctor said it was from all those years of smoking, which Robert had quit 20 years earlier, but apparently the damage was already done. We had maybe 6 months if we were lucky. David came to visit us in the hospital. He hugged his father and cried, and I thought, okay, we're going to get through this together. But as the weeks went on, David's visits became less frequent. He was busy with work. Claire was busy with work. They had just bought a house and were dealing with renovations. I understood. Life doesn't stop just because someone is dying. But I needed him. Robert needed him. And he wasn't there. Robert died on a Tuesday afternoon in March. I was holding his hand. David was stuck in traffic and didn't make it in time. I've never told David how much that hurt me, that his father died without him there. I didn't want to make him feel worse than he already did. At the funeral, David gave a beautiful eulogy about what a great father Robert had been. Everyone cried. I cried. But there was a part of me that felt hollow, like I was watching someone talk about a man they had known a long time ago but had forgotten in the end. After Robert died, I was alone in that house for the first time in my life. The silence was overwhelming. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for him and he wouldn't be there. I'd cook dinner and set 2 plates, then remember and put one back. I'd hear a noise and think it was him coming home from work, and then I'd remember all over again. Grief is like that. It's not one big wave that knocks you down. It's 1,000 small waves that wear you down until you're not sure you can stand anymore. David and Claire invited me over for dinner a few weeks after the funeral. I thought it was going to be a comfort being with family. But the evening felt strange. Claire had made a fancy meal, something with quinoa and kale that I didn't really understand. The house was beautiful, everything new and modern and expensive. They showed me around and I smiled and said all the right things, but I felt out of place. This wasn't the kind of home I knew. This wasn't the kind of life I understood. Over dinner, David started talking about finances. He said he knew this was a difficult time, but we needed to discuss the future. He asked if Robert had left a will. I told him yes, everything had been left to me. The house, the savings, the life insurance. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for me to live comfortably for the rest of my life if I was careful. David nodded, but I saw something flicker across his face. Disappointment maybe. Or frustration. He asked if I had thought about what I was going to do with the house. It was too big for one person, he said. Too much upkeep. Maybe I should think about selling it and moving into a smaller place. Or a retirement community. Somewhere with less responsibility. I told him I wasn't ready to think about that yet. The house was full of memories. It was the last piece of Robert the first had left. David nodded again, but Claire jumped in. She said she understood how hard this must be, but she thought David was right. The house was a lot of work. And wouldn't I be happier somewhere with people my own age? Somewhere with activities and support? I smiled and said I'd think about it, but inside I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. They weren't worried about me. They were worried about the house. As the months went on, David's suggestions became more insistent. He'd call me once a week and the conversation always turned to the house. Had I thought about listing it? Had I talked to a realtor? Had I considered downsizing? I started to dread his calls. I felt like I was being managed, like I was a problem that needed to be solved. Claire started sending me links to retirement communities, places with names like Golden Years Village and Sunset Meadows. They all looked the same to me. Sterile and sad and nothing like home. Then one day, about a year after Robert died, David came over with Claire. He said they needed to talk. They sat me down in my own living room in the chairs that Robert had reupholstered himself, and they told me they had made a decision. They thought it was time for me to move. They had found a nice assisted living facility about an hour away. It was clean and safe and had a full-time staff. I'd have my own room and 3 meals a day. I wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or maintaining the house. They had already toured the place and put down a deposit. All I had to do was say yes. I stared at them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had planned my entire future without asking me. They had decided where I was going to live, how I was going to spend my last years, and they expected me to just go along with it. I asked David why. Why did I need to leave my home? He said it was for my own good. I was getting older. What if I fell? What if I got sick? Who would take care of me? This way I'd be safe. They could visit me on weekends. I'd make friends. I'd be happy. I told him I didn't want to go. I told him this was my home. I told him I wasn't ready. David's face hardened. He said I was being stubborn. He said I wasn't thinking clearly. He said that grief was clouding my judgment. Claire nodded along, her expression full of fake sympathy. They weren't listening to me. They had already made up their minds. And then David said something that I will never forget. He said, "Mom, you have to understand. This house is part of my inheritance. Dad left everything to you, but eventually it's going to come to me. And I need to make sure it's protected. I need to make sure we're making smart decisions about the future. Our future. My generation's future." That's when it hit me. This wasn't about my safety or my happiness. This was about money. This was about securing his inheritance. I was still alive, still healthy enough to live on my own, and my son was already planning how to divide up my assets. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart exactly. Something deeper. Something that couldn't be fixed. I told David to leave. He tried to argue, but I stood up and walked to the door and held it open. He looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I was standing up to him. Claire grabbed her purse and muttered something about me being unreasonable. They left and I closed the door behind them and locked it. Then I sat down on the floor and cried harder than I had cried since Robert died. For weeks I didn't hear from David. No calls. No visits. Nothing. I kept waiting for him to apologize, to realize how cruel he had been. But the silence stretched on. I started to wonder if I had been wrong. Maybe I was being stubborn. Maybe I should have listened. But every time I thought about giving in, I remembered the look on his face when he talked about the inheritance. I remembered the way he said my generation like I was already dead. I spent a lot of time alone during those weeks. I thought about my life, about all the sacrifices I had made. I thought about the dreams I had given up so David could have his. I thought about the trips Robert and I never took because we were saving for David's future. I thought about the years I spent working 2 jobs so David could go to summer camp and take tennis lessons and have everything his friends had. And I realized that somewhere along the way I had stopped being a person. I had become a vessel for someone else's dreams. And now that I was no longer useful, I was disposable. That's when I made my decision. I wasn't going to let my son take everything I had worked for and pretend it was for my own good. I wasn't going to let him erase me. I was going to do something that would make him see me again, really see me, even if it meant he hated me for it. I was going to take control of my own life. I started researching adoption laws. I know that sounds crazy. A 72-year-old woman looking into adopting someone. But the more I read, the more I realized it was possible. You could adopt an adult. It wasn't common, but it was legal. And if I adopted someone, they would become my legal child. They would have the same rights as David, including the right to inherit from me. I thought about who I would adopt. It couldn't be just anyone. It had to be someone who needed help, someone who would appreciate what I was offering. I thought about the young waitress at the diner I went to sometimes, a girl named Sophie who was always kind to me. I thought about the mailman who checked on me during the winter storms. I thought about the neighbor's grandson who mowed my lawn without being asked. But none of them felt right. And then I met James. James was sitting on a bench outside the library one afternoon. He was maybe 30 years old, thin and tired-looking with dark circles under his eyes. He had a backpack next to him and a worn-out jacket that didn't look warm enough for the weather. I sat down on the other end of the bench to rest my legs. We didn't talk at first. But then he pulled out a book and I noticed it was one of Robert's favorites, a novel about a man trying to find his way home. I mentioned that my late husband had loved that book. James looked up, surprised, and we started talking. He told me he had been living in his car for the past few months. He had lost his job during the pandemic and couldn't afford rent. He had no family, no safety net. He was trying to get back on his feet, applying for jobs, staying at the library during the day to use the computers. He wasn't asking for money or pity. He was just talking the way lonely people do when someone actually listens. I listened. And when he finished, I asked him if he wanted to come to my house for dinner. He hesitated, probably thinking I was some crazy old lady. But something in my face must have convinced him I was sincere. He said yes. That night I made pot roast and mashed potatoes, the kind of meal Robert used to love. James ate like he hadn't had a home-cooked meal in months, which he probably hadn't. We talked about books and life and loss. He told me about his parents who had died in a car accident when he was 19. He told me about the jobs he had lost, the friends who had drifted away, the feeling of being invisible in a world that didn't care if you existed or not. I understood that feeling more than he knew. Over the next few weeks, James came over for dinner regularly. I started to look forward to his visits. He helped me with things around the house, fixing a leaky faucet and cleaning out the gutters. He didn't ask for anything in return. He was just grateful to have somewhere to go, someone to talk to. And I realized that this was what family was supposed to feel like. Not obligation or expectation, but genuine care. One evening I told James about my plan. I told him about David and the inheritance and the way I had been treated. I told him I wanted to adopt him. He thought I was joking at first. But when he realized I was serious, he didn't know what to say. He asked me why. Why would I do this for a stranger? I told him he wasn't a stranger anymore. And I told him the truth. I was doing this for me as much as for him. I was doing this because I needed to feel like my life still mattered. I needed to prove that I still had agency, that I could still make my own choices. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said yes. The legal process took a few months. I hired a lawyer, a kind woman who didn't judge me for what I was doing. He helped me file the paperwork. There were court hearings and background checks and a lot of questions. But in the end, the judge approved it. James became my legal son. He moved into the guest room. We became a family, not because of blood but because we chose each other. I didn't tell David right away. I knew he would find out eventually, but I wanted to have some time with James first. Some time to enjoy this new chapter of my life without interference. But word got around. Small towns are like that. Someone saw James living with me and mentioned it to someone else, and eventually it got back to David. He called me furious. He demanded to know what I had done. I told him calmly that I had adopted someone. He asked who. I told him. He asked why. I told him that too. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then David exploded. He said I had lost my mind. He said I was being manipulated by some con artist. He said I was throwing away his inheritance out of spite. He said a lot of things, ugly things, things I never thought I would hear from my son. I let him say them all. And when he finally ran out of words, I said something I had been holding in for a long time. I told him that the inheritance had never been his to begin with. It was mine. Robert left it to me, not to him. And I could do whatever I wanted with it. If he had treated me with respect, if he had seen me as a person instead of a piggy bank, things might have been different. But he hadn't. So I made a different choice. David hung up on me. Claire called later, trying a different approach. She was sweet and concerned, asking if I was feeling okay, suggesting that maybe I should see a doctor. She said that adopting a homeless man was erratic behavior, a sign that I wasn't thinking clearly. She said they were worried about me. I told her I had never felt clearer in my life. She stopped pretending to be nice after that. She said I was a selfish old woman who was ruining their future. She said I would regret this. Then she hung up too. I did feel a pang of sadness after those calls. Not because I regretted what I had done, but because I realized that the relationship I had with my son was truly over. There was no going back from this. But I also felt something else. Relief. Freedom. For the first time in decades, I wasn't living my life for someone else. I was living it for me. James and I settled into a routine. He found a job at a local hardware store. He started taking classes at the community college. He was rebuilding his life and I was rebuilding mine. We cooked dinner together every night. We watched old movies. We talked about everything and nothing. He called me mom, and unlike when Claire had said it, it felt real. He wasn't pretending. He genuinely cared about me. And I cared about him. David tried a few more times to contact me. He sent emails and letters, most of them angry, some of them pleading. He said I was breaking his heart. He said I was dishonoring his father's memory. He said I was destroying our family. I didn't respond. What could I say that I hadn't already said? He didn't want to understand. He wanted me to fall in line, to be the mother he needed me to be, not the person I actually was. Claire tried to turn other family members against me. She called my sister, who lived across the country, and told her I was being taken advantage of. My sister called me concerned. I explained the situation. She was quiet for a moment, then she laughed. She said it was about time I did something for myself. She said Robert would have been proud of me for standing up to David. That made me cry, the good kind of crying, the kind that feels like release. Months passed. Then a year. James graduated from community college with a certificate in carpentry. He got a better job. He started dating a nice woman he met at work. Life went on. I updated my will, making sure that everything would be split equally between David and James. I didn't cut David out completely. I'm not that cruel. But I made sure he understood that he wasn't entitled to everything just because he was my biological son. He was going to have to share. And he was going to have to accept that I had made a choice, my choice about my own life. David and Claire had a baby, my grandchild. I found out through a birth announcement that came in the mail. There was no phone call, no invitation to visit. Just a card with a picture of a tiny, wrinkled newborn. I cried when I saw it. Not because I was invited back into their lives, but because I wasn't. I had a grandchild I would probably never meet. That hurt more than anything David had said to me. But I also knew that it was his choice. He was punishing me, trying to hurt me the way he felt I had hurt him. Maybe one day he would understand. Maybe he wouldn't. Either way, I had to accept it. James saw me crying over the birth announcement. He sat down next to me and put his arm around my shoulders. He didn't say anything at first. Then he said, you gave me a life when I had nothing. You gave me a family when I was completely alone. I know I'm not your real son. I know I can't replace David. But I want you to know that I love you. And I'm grateful for you every single day. I hugged him and cried harder, but this time it was different. It was grief mixed with gratitude. I had lost one son, but I had gained another. Not a replacement, but something new. Something unexpected. I'm 73 now. My health is still pretty good, all things considered. I take walks every morning. I tend my garden. I bake cookies for the neighborhood kids. James and his girlfriend Melissa come over for Sunday dinners. She's a sweet girl and she calls me Grandma Maggie, which makes me smile every time. We're talking about them getting married next year. James asked me if I would help plan the wedding. I said yes, of course. This time I'll be planning a wedding because I want to, not because I feel obligated to. I think about David sometimes. I wonder if he thinks about me. I wonder if he ever regrets the way things turned out. I wonder if he'll ever reach out, really reach out, not to yell or accuse but just to talk. I would answer if he did. I'm not holding a grudge. I'm just living my life. But I'm not holding my breath either. Some relationships can't be fixed no matter how much you want them to be. And that's okay. It's sad, but it's okay. What I did wasn't about revenge. I know some people think it was. I know David thinks it was. But it wasn't. It was about reclaiming my own story. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about saying that my life still mattered, that my choices still mattered even at 72 years old. I spent so many years being what other people needed me to be. A good wife. A good mother. A good employee. I was always good. But I was never just me. And when my son told me that the inheritance was only for his generation, he was really saying that my generation was over. That I was over. That I should just quietly fade away and let him have what was left. But I wasn't ready to fade away. I'm still not. Adopting James taught me something important. Family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up. It's about caring. It's about seeing someone for who they really are and loving them anyway. David stopped seeing me a long time ago. He saw an obligation, a burden, an obstacle between him and what he wanted. But James sees me. He sees Maggie, the woman who likes old movies and terrible puns and burnt toast in the morning. He sees the person, not the parent. And that's what I needed all along. To be seen. I'm not saying I'm a perfect person. I made mistakes. I probably spoiled David too much when he was young. I probably gave him the impression that everything would always be handed to him. I probably didn't teach him about gratitude or empathy the way I should have. But I did the best I could with what I knew at the time. And when he became an adult, his choices became his own. I can't take responsibility for the man he became. That's on him. If I could go back and change things, I don't know if I would. The pain of losing my relationship with David is real. The sadness of not knowing my grandchild is real. But so is the joy I've found in my new life. So is the peace I feel knowing that I stood up for myself. Life is complicated like that. You can lose something precious and gain something unexpected at the same time. Both things can be true. I hope that someday David reads this or hears about it and understands. I hope he realizes that I didn't do this to hurt him. I did this to save myself. I hope he looks at his own child one day and thinks about what kind of parent he wants to be. I hope he learns that love isn't about control or ownership or inheritance. It's about respect. It's about listening. It's about seeing the people you love as whole human beings with their own needs and dreams and dignity. I hope he learns that before it's too late. But even if he doesn't, I'll be okay. Because I have James. I have Melissa. I have my garden and my books and my Sunday dinners. I have a life that feels like mine again. And that's enough. Has to be enough. Because at the end of the day, the only person whose approval I really need is my own. And for the first time in a very long time, I approve of the woman I see in the mirror. She's strong. She's brave. She's a little bit stubborn. And she's still here, still standing, still living her story on her own terms. So yes, when my son told me that the inheritance was only for his generation, I made a choice that shocked everyone. I legally adopted a stranger. And I would do it again in a heartbeat. Because it wasn't about the money or the house or teaching David a lesson. It was about something much simpler and much more important. It was about remembering that I matter. My life matters. My choices matter. And no one, not even my own son, gets to take that away from me. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. I'm going to spend whatever time I have left living for myself. Not selfishly but authentically. I'm going to water my tomatoes and read my books and laugh at James's terrible jokes. I'm going to hug Melissa and teach her my mother's recipes. I'm going to sit on my front porch in the evenings and watch the sun go down over the trees that Robert planted all those years ago. I'm going to be present in my own life. And when my time comes, whenever that is, I'm going to go knowing that I didn't just exist. I lived. On my own terms. With my eyes wide open. And with no regrets. That's my story. It's not a fairy tale. There's no neat, happy ending where everyone reconciles and learns their lesson. Real life is messier than that. But it's mine. Every painful, beautiful, complicated bit of it. And that's enough. If you're listening to this and you're in a situation where you feel invisible, where you feel like your life doesn't matter anymore, where the people who are supposed to love you treat you like a burden, I want you to know something. You matter. Your life is still yours. Your choices are still yours. Don't let anyone take that away from you. Stand up. Speak up. Make the hard decisions. Live your life the way you want to live it. You might lose people along the way. You might be judged. You might be called selfish or crazy or worse. But you'll also find something precious. You'll find yourself. And that's worth everything. I found myself at 72 years old, sitting in my living room, making a decision that everyone said was wrong. And you know what? It was the rightest thing I ever did. So here's to second chances. Here's to new beginnings. Here's to family you choose and love you earn. Here's to standing up even when your knees are shaking. Here's to being seen. Here's to being heard. Here's to being alive, really alive for as long as we're given. That's what I wish for you. That's what I wish for all of us. To live our stories with courage and honesty and hope. Because in the end, that's all we really have. Our stories. And they're worth fighting for.